Cathay Pacific has cancelled dozens of flights on Monday after one of its Airbus A350 planes had an engine issue. The problem was discovered shortly after the flight took off from Hong Kong. The plane returned to the city about an hour later. Cathay is inspecting its entire fleet of A350s. Unnamed sources are telling Reuters and others that the problem is with a fuel nozzle and with fuel lines within the engine. Cathay says it's in touch with both Airbus, which makes the plane, and the engine maker Rolls-Royce. Now, the engine involved, it's called the Trent XWB 97. The 97 stands for 97,000 pounds of thrust, and it powers the A350-1000, which is the largest of the 350 variants. Airbus has a backlog of 211 of 1,000 versions of the aircraft. Rolls-Royce is the sole designated engine supplier for the A350. And so, if this is a problem, then it's going to arguably be across more planes, if it's a problem. Engine manufacturers are having a host of difficulties that's giving woes to airlines. The Boeing 787 has a separate and different problem, this time with the Rolls-Royce Trent engine. Pratt & Whitney is facing issues with its engines. Many airlines have AOG, aircraft on ground, because the engines require more maintenance, they don't have enough spare parts or spare engines, and the manufacturers have a full backlog of it on their hands. Several carriers have grounded: Cathay, JetBlue, Spirit, Wizz Air. In fact, Wizz Air's chief executive told me of his frustrations earlier this year about engine problems.
We just have to go through this cycle. It is hugely annoying. It is irritating. It is very inefficient. But as you say, we get financial compensation, and we are very focused on getting over with this operationally, and as soon as possible get the fleet back in the air.
Brian Summers is with me, the editor of the Airline Observer, and it is always good to have you, Brian. To some extent, we know all about Airbus and Boeing's problems of supplies, etc., etc. But this engine bit is the unspoken part. But you and I, when we speak to CEOs, they're spitting feathers that the amount of time that the engine's on the wing is getting less and less.
Absolutely. I was talking with a senior airline executive last week, and he said the same thing. He said, Brian, everybody worries so much about Boeing. It's the engine manufacturers. They can't deliver the engines on time. Sometimes the engines are faulty. Sometimes they need to be repaired or replaced much sooner than they need to be. And I think people forget. They think that this is just some component. Richard, these engines are extraordinarily expensive, tens of millions of dollars per engine. And as you mentioned there, if you want to buy an Airbus A350, you have one choice. You go to Rolls-Royce. I mean, how many other things do we buy? And we only have one choice of where we can buy them.
Now, that, of course, has been a relatively recent trend for even the smaller aircrafts, which will have one choice of engine. And the argument goes, sometimes it's Rolls that gets it, sometimes it's GE that gets it.
Yeah, this is where the engine manufacturers push back a little bit. Airlines didn't want to buy brand new, what they call clean sheet airplanes from Airbus and Boeing. That's why we're still flying the 737 that's 50 years old. But they wanted brand new engines. And as you know, it is extremely expensive to build an engine from scratch with the latest technology. And if you have 3 or 4 engine choices, well, how is Rolls-Royce going to recoup its money back for building this amazing engine if airlines can just, bid out to the lowest bidder? And so we're getting much, much better technology. That is something that is very important. These airplanes sip a lot less fuel than the airplanes that came before, and it's all about the engine.
In fact, when we talk about the Neo option on the 330 or the 320 Neo, that stands for new engine option. I wonder, though, we don't know the seriousness. I mean, Cathay says it'll have the fleet back in the air by the weekend, and it's a fuel nozzle or fuel line problem. But the ability of the engine manufacturers to keep coming up with new engines that are reliable and sustainable is just, it's almost impossible.
It is very impossible. And as airline executives tell us, Richard, it depends on where in the world you are. So Tim Clark, the president of Emirates, has a problem with this exact engine. And that was before what just happened. Tim Clark's issue with the engine is that it is not reliable enough for an airline that flies hot routes, far distances from the desert.